The moment my daughter raised her hand in family court, my husband stopped blinking. That's the first thing I remember. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not even the sound of the rain hammering against the courthouse windows outside. Just Ethan, frozen beside the defense table with one hand still resting on Lily's shoulder, like he could physically hold the situation together if he pressed hard enough. My daughter's voice trembled when she spoke. "Your Honor, I need to tell you something before you decide." The courtroom went completely still. Lily looked down at the tablet in her lap, then toward my attorney. Not me. My attorney. And suddenly, for the first time in months, fear appeared in Ethan's face instead of mine. Real fear. The kind that arrives when someone realizes the truth survived longer than they planned. Lily swallowed hard. "I already let Ms. Harper hear it," she whispered. "Because I thought maybe Mommy was going to disappear if I didn't." Ethan stood up so fast his chair scraped violently across the floor. "Lily," he snapped instinctively. The judge's expression hardened immediately. "Sit down, Mr. Bennett." But it was already too late. Because for the first time in nearly a year, my daughter wasn't looking at me like she was afraid I might break. She was looking at her father like she finally understood who had been breaking us all along. The first time I realized my marriage was in trouble, Ethan was folding laundry. That sounds ridiculous now considering how everything ended, but that's the truth. Not screaming, not cheating, not some dramatic betrayal. Laundry. It was late October, cold enough outside that the kitchen windows fogged near the edges. I had returned from Fort Liberty after a 12-day field training exercise running on caffeine protein bars and maybe 8 total hours of sleep. Lily was upstairs doing homework. I walked into the living room still carrying my duffel bag and found Ethan folding towels with slow, careful precision while the television murmured quietly in the background. Normal, domestic, safe. At least that's how it looked. "You're home early," he said without looking up. I laughed softly. "You sound disappointed." That should have been a joke. Instead, he paused for half a second too long before smiling. "No, just surprised." Something about that pause stayed with me all night. Not because it was hostile. Because it was empty. Like he'd already started living emotionally separate from me and forgot to pretend for a moment. At 41 years old, I understood tension. I understood danger. I understood how quickly situations could turn unstable. The Army teaches you that. You learn to read rooms before people speak. You learn how exhaustion changes behavior. You learn that silence can mean more than yelling if you pay close enough attention. I had spent 20 years in uniform most recently as a major overseeing logistics operations and personnel coordination. Before that came Afghanistan. Before that came years of deployments, relocations, funerals, ceremonies, and long stretches of learning how to survive without comfort. The military had taught me discipline. But discipline becomes complicated inside marriage, especially when the person hurting you never raises their voice. Ethan used to admire my career. Back when we first met, he loved introducing me as the toughest woman in North Carolina. He used to brag about my promotions to strangers at cookouts. But admiration changes once sacrifice starts affecting daily life, especially for men raised to believe they should be the emotional center of a household. Ethan never said that directly. His family didn't need to. They communicated disappointment the way wealthy suburban families often do in America, through concern. His mother, Patricia, mastered it perfectly. "Oh, Claire, you must be exhausted. Lily misses you terribly when you're away." I don't know how military mothers do it. Always polite, always smiling. Never openly cruel. That made it worse. You can defend yourself against insults. Concern is harder to fight because objecting to it makes you sound guilty. And Patricia understood that instinctively. The older Lily became, the more Patricia inserted herself into our lives. School pickups, dance recitals, weekend visits. At first I appreciated the help. Military schedules are brutal, and Ethan traveled often for work too. But gradually I noticed something changing. Whenever I came home from training, Lily seemed tense for the first hour or two, watching me carefully, like she was trying to measure my mood before relaxing. One evening, while helping her with math homework, she suddenly asked, "Mom, do loud noises still bother you from Afghanistan?" I looked up slowly. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged too quickly. "Just wondering." Another time. "Mom, Do soldiers ever get angry and not mean to? The question hit me harder. I remember setting my coffee cup down very carefully before answering. Everybody gets angry sometimes, but soldiers are trained to control themselves. Lily nodded, but she didn't look reassured. That night I lay awake much longer than usual, staring at the ceiling fan turning above our bed. Beside me, Ethan slept peacefully. Or pretended to. The problem with emotional manipulation is that it rarely arrives dramatically. It accumulates quietly. One suggestion at a time, one worried conversation, one carefully planted idea. Especially around children. Especially around children who love both parents and desperately want to trust both. A month later, I found the first real crack. I had come home early from base after a canceled meeting. Ethan didn't hear me enter the house because he was in the kitchen speaking softly with Patricia. "You can't keep living like this," Patricia murmured. Ethan exhaled heavily. "I know. She's never really here emotionally anymore." I stopped in the hallway. There was no anger in Patricia's voice. That was the frightening part. Only certainty. "I don't think Claire even realizes how cold she's become," she continued gently. Cold. That word lodged itself under my skin. I stepped into the kitchen before I could stop myself. Patricia immediately smiled. "Oh, you're home early." Ethan turned too fast. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before disappearing. Nobody mentioned what I'd overheard. That became another pattern. Conversations stopping when I entered rooms, lowered voices, careful glances. Not enough to confront directly, just enough to make me feel isolated inside my own home. And the terrifying part was how often I started questioning myself afterward. Was I distant? Maybe. Military life trains you to compartmentalize emotion. You learn to function while exhausted. You learn how to keep moving while grieving. Sometimes that discipline follows you home. But cold. Number. I loved my daughter with a force so intense it frightened me sometimes. Everything I endured, deployments, missed holidays, endless pressure I endured, believing I was building stability for her future. I told myself that constantly whenever guilt started creeping in. Soldiers panic in private, I reminded myself. In public they breathe and continue. Then came the yellow envelope. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon while Lily was upstairs practicing piano. I almost ignored it because I assumed it was insurance paperwork. Instead, I found custody filings. I sat alone at the kitchen table reading words that didn't feel real. Emotional instability, inconsistent parental presence, concerns regarding psychological adjustment after combat exposure. The room became strangely quiet around me. Not silence exactly. More like distance. Like the world had suddenly moved farther away. A few minutes later, Ethan walked into the kitchen carrying groceries. He stopped when he saw the paperwork in front of me. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, I asked very calmly, "How long have you been planning this?" Ethan set the grocery bags down carefully before answering. "I didn't want it to happen this way." That told me everything. Not denial. Not apology. Preparation. I looked at the man I'd spent 15 years loving and realized something that chilled me deeper than anger ever could. This wasn't impulsive. It was organized. Thought through. Discussed, built slowly over time while I was still trying to save a marriage he had already emotionally abandoned. Upstairs, I could hear Lily practicing the same piano scale over and over again, missing the same note each time. The custody hearings began 3 weeks later, and by then Ethan had already done the most important thing a manipulative person can do. He had made everyone feel sorry for him. Not dramatically. Subtly. Carefully. The exhausted husband trying to hold the family together. The father worried about emotional stability at home. The man quietly carrying burdens while his military wife remained consumed by duty. If you only looked at the surface, it was convincing. And family court runs on appearances more than people like to admit. The first hearing took place on a gray Monday morning in downtown Raleigh. Rainwater streaked the courthouse windows, and the entire building smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee. I wore a navy blouse and gray slacks instead of my uniform. Denise Harper, my attorney, advised against military dress for the early hearings. "You don't want them seeing rank first," she told me. "You want them seeing humanity." I understood the strategy. Still walking into court without my uniform felt strangely vulnerable, like entering battle without structure around my body. Ethan was already there when I arrived. Dark blazer, relaxed posture, one hand resting lightly against Lily's back. He looked tired in exactly the correct way. Not unstable, not angry. Just concerned. That was Ethan's real talent. He understood emotional optics better than most people understand language. Lily saw me first. Her face brightened instinctively for half a second before she glanced up at Ethan. The smile faded immediately. That tiny moment hurt more than the custody papers ever had. Because children don't monitor their affection unless they're afraid of disappointing someone. Denise greeted me quietly near the courtroom doors. She was in her late 50s, sharp-eyed, composed, and frighteningly observant. "You slept at all?" she asked. "Enough." She gave me a look that suggested she knew I was lying. As we sat reviewing documents before the hearing, Denise kept her voice low. "They're leaning heavily into emotional consistency." I nodded once. Not because I agreed. Because I understood exactly what that meant. I wasn't being compared against abusive mothers or negligent parents. I was being compared against softness. And softness is a difficult standard for military women. Especially in conservative family courtrooms, where people still unconsciously expect mothers to radiate warmth every second they exist. The hearing itself moved slowly. Painfully slowly. Ethan's attorney never directly attacked me. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, he built concern brick by brick. Major Bennett has served her country honorably. She's clearly intelligent and accomplished. No one disputes her dedication. Then came the pivot. But military life inevitably creates emotional strain on families. Strain. Such an innocent word. He presented schedules showing my travel, training records, missed school functions, a counseling referral from the VA after my second deployment. Not trauma treatment. Grief counseling. 2 soldiers under my command had died overseas. But in court, nuance disappears quickly. Especially when someone is carefully shaping perception. I stayed calm through all of it. Not performatively calm, controlled. There's a difference. At one point, Ethan's attorney displayed a photograph of me asleep on the couch, still wearing combat boots after a 70-hour operations cycle. The implication was obvious. Unavailable, disconnected, detached from family life. I looked at the photograph for several seconds. All I actually saw was exhaustion. The kind soldiers normalize because survival leaves little room for self-pity. Denise leaned toward me quietly. "You're doing fine." I barely nodded. Across the courtroom, Patricia sat beside Ethan wearing a cream-colored sweater and an expression of restrained sadness. Not triumph. Sadness. That was intentional too. People trust women who appear heartbroken more than women who appear angry. When Patricia took the stand, she spoke gently enough to make the courtroom lean closer. "Claire is a remarkable woman," she began. I almost smiled. That sentence always meant danger with Patricia. "She's brave, disciplined, accomplished." Patricia folded her hands carefully. "But Lily needs emotional steadiness. And lately, I worry she feels lonely." Lonely. Again, not accusation. Concern. That was Patricia's weapon of choice. "I've seen Lily become anxious whenever there's tension in the house," she continued softly. Denise stood for cross-examination. "Mrs. Bennett," she asked calmly, "how often do you visit your son's home?" "Oh, not too often." Denise glanced at her notes. Would 3 to 4 times weekly sound accurate? Patricia hesitated slightly. "Around that?" "And during those visits, have you discussed Claire's military service with Lily?" "Only positively." That answer was polished enough to sound rehearsed. Denise noticed too. "Have you ever suggested Claire struggles emotionally because of combat deployment?" Patricia gave the faintest wounded smile. "Of course not." Not directly, I thought. That was always the trick. Nothing explicit, nothing provable. Just years of implication carefully planted like seeds. After Patricia came Sophia. Not Ethan's sister, not family. Sophia Warren worked in real estate and had been orbiting Ethan's social circle for over a year. I'd met her twice at neighborhood gatherings. Blonde hair, measured smile, immaculate composure. Too composed, honestly. At the time, I told myself I was imagining the chemistry between them. Now I wasn't so sure. Sophia testified only briefly, but her role was obvious to reinforce Ethan's image. "He adores Lily," she said softly. "He talks about her constantly." Denise asked, "And how often are you around the Bennett family?" Sophia smiled politely, only socially. Another careful answer. Everything about Ethan's side felt polished, curated, as if they'd rehearsed emotional tone more than factual accuracy. By the second hearing, I began noticing something even worse. I was starting to second-guess my own reactions. That's what prolonged emotional manipulation does. It shifts your internal compass little by little until you begin examining perfectly normal emotions like evidence. One night after court, I sat alone in my car outside the house for nearly 15 minutes before going inside. My hands rested against the steering wheel while rain tapped softly across the windshield. I remembered something an older female colonel once told me years earlier during deployment. Women in command survive by controlling visible emotion, but eventually people forget we're human underneath. At the time I thought she sounded bitter. Now I understood she sounded tired. Inside the house, Ethan was helping Lily with homework at the dining room table. Warm lighting, soft music, domestic peace. It looked almost beautiful. Then Lily glanced up and saw me standing in the doorway. Her body stiffened instantly. Not because she feared me, because she feared conflict. And that realization nearly destroyed me. Later that night, Lily knocked quietly on my bedroom door carrying her blanket. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" "Always." She climbed beside me silently, chewing the sleeve of her sweatshirt the way she did whenever anxiety overwhelmed her. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders carefully. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Mom." "Yeah, baby." If someone says things over and over, can it make you confused about what's true? Every muscle in my body tightened. I kept my voice gentle. "What do you mean?" She stared down at her hands. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. I could feel it. The pressure inside her, the fear, the divided loyalty. Children should never have to carry adult manipulation. It bends them in places they don't know how to repair yet. I kissed the top of her head slowly. "No matter what happens," I whispered, "you never have to earn my love." Lily's face crumpled unexpectedly. For one terrifying second, I thought she might tell me everything. Instead, she just held on to me tighter. Downstairs, I heard the front door open. Ethan was home from taking out the trash. Immediately, Lily pulled away slightly. That hurt me more than anything else had so far. After the second hearing, I stopped trying to save my marriage. That realization came quietly one night while I was ironing a blouse in the laundry room at nearly midnight. No tears, no dramatic collapse. Just clarity. The iron hissed softly across fabric while the rest of the house slept, and for the first time in months I allowed myself to stop asking the wrong question. I had spent too long wondering, how do I fix this? But that was never the real question. The real question was, why was my daughter beginning to look afraid inside her own home? Once I understood that, everything changed. Not outwardly. Outwardly, I became calmer. More careful, more observant. A soldier learns quickly that panic clouds pattern recognition. And once I stopped reacting emotionally to Ethan's behavior, I finally started seeing the structure underneath it. He rarely criticized me directly anymore. Instead, he specialized in implication. One evening, Lily accidentally spilled orange juice across the kitchen counter while I was helping her study spelling words. Before I could even grab a towel, Ethan stepped forward gently. "It's okay," he said softly to Lily. "Mom's had a stressful day." The sentence sounded harmless. Compassionate even. But Lily immediately looked at me nervously instead of simply cleaning the spill. That was the damage. Not fear of punishment. Fear of emotional unpredictability. And Ethan planted that fear constantly in ways subtle enough to deny later. Another time I came downstairs after a nightmare not uncommon after years of military service, and found Ethan sitting in the dark living room. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." He nodded slowly. "Lily heard you pacing earlier. She got worried." "Not accusation." "Never accusation. Just information carefully delivered to produce guilt." The terrifying part was how effective it became over time. I started monitoring myself constantly. Lowering my voice, softening my movements, measuring facial expressions before entering rooms. No battlefield had ever made me feel that psychologically exhausted. Because at least overseas I knew who the enemy was. One Friday afternoon, Denise called while I was leaving base. "Claire, I need you to prepare yourself emotionally for something." My stomach tightened immediately. What happened? The court-appointed evaluator submitted preliminary notes. I leaned against my car door without unlocking it. And she believes Lily shows signs of divided loyalty stress. I closed my eyes briefly. That didn't surprise me. What else? Denise hesitated. She also wrote that Lily appears unusually cautious when discussing emotional conflict at home. That made my chest tighten harder. Cautious how? She edits herself constantly before answering questions. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Because I knew exactly why Lily was doing that. Children adapt to emotional environments faster than adults realize. They become translators, negotiators, tiny survival experts trying to maintain peace between people they love. And somewhere along the way my daughter had learned that honesty felt dangerous. That realization haunted me for days. Then came the moment everything shifted. It happened on a Tuesday evening while Ethan was showering upstairs. I was cleaning the kitchen when Lily walked in carrying her tablet against her chest. Not casually. Protectively. The second she saw me looking at it, her grip tightened. Something inside me sharpened instantly. "Hey, sweetheart." "Hi." She hovered near the doorway awkwardly. "You okay?" She nodded too fast. Then she glanced upstairs toward the running shower. Only for a second. But it was enough. Fear changes children physically. You see it in the shoulders first. I dried my hand slowly on a dish towel. "Lily, is there something you want to tell me?" Her eyes filled with panic immediately. "Number." Too quick. Too frightened. I stepped closer carefully, keeping my voice low and calm. "You're not in trouble." "I know." But she still looked terrified. Then very softly she asked, "Mom, if somebody lies a lot, can they start believing the lie too?" The question hit me like cold water. Before I could answer, the shower upstairs stopped running. Instantly, Lily stepped backward. That alone told me more than words ever could. That night after Ethan fell asleep, I sat alone on the back patio wrapped in an old army sweatshirt while cold air drifted through the trees. I kept replaying Lily's face in my mind. The hesitation, the fear, the guilt. And suddenly another memory surfaced. 3 weeks earlier, Lily had asked whether soldiers get angry without meaning to. Not curiosity. Testing. She had been trying to reconcile two competing realities, the mother she knew, and the mother someone was quietly describing to her. I looked up at the dark sky and forced myself to breathe slowly. Inhale, exhale. A technique I'd learned years earlier during mortar attacks overseas. Funny thing about trauma, people assume it's always explosions and gunfire that stay with you. Sometimes it's helplessness. Sometimes it's watching someone you love become psychologically cornered while you struggle to reach them. That night, I made myself a promise. Whatever happened in court, I would not emotionally collapse inside this house. I was still a soldier. And soldiers survive long enough to protect the people depending on them. The final hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. 7 days away. The atmosphere inside the house changed immediately after we received the date. Ethan became even softer around Lily, even more attentive, even more careful. Almost rehearsed. One evening I overheard him speaking quietly to her in the living room. "You know, nobody's angry at Mommy, right?" Lily's small voice answered, "Okay. We just want everybody safe and happy." Safe. That word again. Always subtle, always deniable. I stood frozen in the hallway listening. Then Ethan continued gently. "Sometimes adults need help when they're overwhelmed." My hands clenched automatically at my sides. Not because I wanted to scream, because I suddenly understood how thoroughly he had constructed this narrative around her. Not with threats. With repetition. That's what made it so dangerous. The next afternoon, Lily came into my room carrying a shoebox. "I found these," she said quietly. Inside were old deployment photographs. Pictures of me overseas with my unit, sandstorms, supply convoys, smiling exhausted soldiers holding terrible coffee. Lily picked up one photo carefully. "You look happy here." I almost laughed at the irony. That day we'd been awake for 30 hours. "But you're smiling." I looked at the photograph. She was right. I was smiling. Not because war made me happy, because purpose did. Back then, people trusted me, relied on me, believed I could protect them. Now my own daughter wasn't sure whether to trust her memories of me anymore. The thought nearly broke my heart. Lily stared down at the photos silently for a while before whispering, "I don't want you to disappear." Every instinct in my body reacted instantly. I took her face gently in my hands. "Listen to me carefully." My voice stayed calm, steady, military-level controlled. "Nothing on this earth could ever make me stop fighting for you." Tears filled her eyes immediately, and for one terrible moment it looked like she was about to confess something enormous. Instead, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. That night, long after everyone went to bed, I passed Lily's room and noticed light beneath the door. I knocked softly. No answer. When I opened it slightly, she was sitting on the floor beside her bed holding her tablet. Recording something. The second she saw me, she shut the screen off. But not before I caught a glimpse of tears on her face. The morning of the final custody hearing felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful. Controlled. Like the house itself understood something irreversible was about to happen. I woke before dawn and stood alone in the kitchen drinking black coffee while soft blue light spread across the backyard through the windows. For a few minutes nobody else was awake, and I allowed myself one dangerous thought. What if I lose her? Not legally. Emotionally. Because custody battles don't just divide households, they reshape memory. They teach children which parent feels safer to believe. And for months, Ethan had been shaping that reality one careful sentence at a time. Upstairs floorboards creaked softly. Lily. A few moments later, she appeared in the doorway wearing a pale sweater and holding her tablet against her chest again. Always the tablet now. Her eyes looked exhausted. She hadn't been sleeping properly for weeks. Neither had I. "Morning, baby." "Morning." I studied her quietly. "You hungry?" She shrugged. That frightened me more than tears would have. Children stop feeling hunger when anxiety grows too large. Before I could say anything else, Ethan entered the kitchen already dressed for court. Calm, composed, controlled. The image of stability. "Big day," he said gently. I looked at him over the rim of my coffee mug. Not once during this entire process had he looked openly angry. Even now there was only measured concern in his expression. That was part of what made him dangerous. Men like Ethan don't explode, they reposition reality. Lily sat silently at the table while Ethan packed snacks into her bag like we were preparing for a school field trip instead of a custody hearing. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked softly. Lily nodded automatically. Then she glanced at me. Only for a second. But something in her face looked different this morning. Not fear. Decision. The courthouse looked colder than I remembered. Gray stone, gray skies, rain threatening again. Denise met us outside security carrying 2 thick folders under one arm. "You holding up?" she asked quietly. "I've had worse mornings." That earned the smallest smile from her. Military answer. Occupational hazard. But Denise's expression turned serious again almost immediately. "The judge is leaning toward primary residential placement with Ethan unless something changes significantly today." I nodded once. I appreciated honesty. Even painful honesty. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than previous hearings, more final, more exhausted. Patricia sat in the second row beside Sophia wearing dark navy instead of her usual soft colors. Interesting choice, less grandmotherly, more formal. Sophia avoided looking at me altogether. Ethan sat beside his attorney reviewing paperwork calmly, while Lily remained unusually quiet near him. Then the hearing began. The first hour passed exactly how I feared it would. Measured, clinical, devastating. The evaluator testified that Lily displayed chronic emotional tension related to parental conflict. Ethan's attorney emphasized consistency, school stability, and my demanding military responsibilities. Nobody accused me of abuse anymore. That would have been easier to survive. Instead, they framed me as emotionally unreachable. A good soldier, a difficult mother. At one point, the judge looked directly at me and asked, "Major Bennett, do you believe your military career has affected your ability to emotionally connect with your daughter?" The courtroom went completely silent. I answered honestly. I believe military service changes people, but loving my daughter has never required less feeling from me. If anything, it required more. The judge nodded thoughtfully, but I couldn't read her expression. Family court judges become experts at hiding emotion. Across the room, Ethan lowered his eyes slightly, like my answer saddened him. Always performing. Then came his testimony. He spoke carefully about peace, about stability, about wanting Lily to grow up without emotional uncertainty. Everything sounded reasonable. That was the terrifying part. Manipulative people rarely sound monstrous in public. They sound compassionate. Near the end of his testimony, Ethan glanced briefly toward Lily. "I've tried very hard to protect my daughter from adult stress," he said quietly. That almost broke me. Because Lily had been carrying more adult stress than either of us should have allowed. Denise cross-examined carefully. "Mr. Bennett," she asked, "have you ever discussed Major Bennett's emotional state with Lily directly? Only in reassuring ways?" "Meaning?" Ethan folded his hands together calmly. "Children notice tension. I simply tried to help Lily feel safe." Safe. Again. Always that word. Denise studied him for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "Would you describe yourself as an honest man, Mr. Bennett?" "Yes." No hesitation. No visible fear. For one brief moment I wondered whether maybe we really were going to lose. Then I noticed movement beside him. Lily. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her tablet so hard her knuckles turned white. Denise noticed too. The judge continued reviewing notes while Ethan answered another question from his attorney. Then suddenly Lily raised her hand. A tiny movement. But it stopped the entire room. The judge blinked in surprise. "Yes, sweetheart?" Lily's breathing became shaky immediately. Ethan turned toward her too fast. "Lily," he said quietly, warning hidden beneath gentleness. My stomach dropped. Because I recognized that tone. Not anger. Control. The same careful pressure he'd been using for months. Lily swallowed hard. "There's something important," she whispered. The judge softened slightly. "What is it?" Lily looked toward Denise instead of me. That detail would stay with me forever. Not because it hurt. Because it meant my daughter had been carrying this alone long enough to seek out another safe adult first. Her voice trembled harder now. "A few days ago, I let Ms. Harper listen to something from my tablet." The entire courtroom shifted. Ethan's face changed instantly. Not dramatically. Subtly. But after months of studying him, I saw it immediately. Fear. Real fear. His attorney turned toward him sharply. Denise stood slowly. "Your Honor," she said carefully with the court's permission, "I believe this directly concerns the credibility of testimony presented throughout these proceedings." Ethan stood up immediately. "This is inappropriate." The judge's voice cut through the room like glass. "Sit down, Mr. Bennett." For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan looked uncertain. Not angry, not wounded. Cornered. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what to do," she whispered. "I thought if I told anybody, Daddy would stop loving me." Something inside my chest cracked wide open. Denise connected her phone to the courtroom audio system while the clerk assisted quietly. The room had become completely still now except for rain tapping faintly against the windows. Then the recording began. At first, only muffled voices. Kitchen sounds, dishes, movement. Then Ethan's voice became clear. "Once custody is settled, everything else can finally move forward." Patricia answered softly. "You've sacrificed enough years already." My blood ran cold. Another voice entered. "Sophia." Quiet, nervous. "What about Lily?" Then Ethan laughed softly. Not cruelly. Casually. "That's why we need the court convinced Claire's emotionally unstable first." The courtroom froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Lily's tiny recorded voice cut through the audio. "But Mommy's not scary." A long silence followed in the recording. Then Ethan answered gently. "Sweetheart, sometimes people hide parts of themselves." Back in the courtroom, Lily began crying openly. "I knew he was lying," she whispered through tears. "I just didn't know how to stop it anymore." Across the room, Patricia looked physically ill. Sophia stared down at the floor. "And Ethan?" Ethan finally looked exactly like what he was. Not a concerned father. A man who had underestimated the conscience of his own child. The silence after the recording ended felt heavier than any explosion I had ever survived overseas. No one in the courtroom moved. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows, but inside that room the air itself seemed frozen in place around Ethan. For months he had controlled every narrative, every expression, every implication. And now a 10-year-old girl had undone all of it with the truth. The judge removed her glasses slowly and looked directly at Lily. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "did anyone ask you to make this recording?" Lily shook her head immediately. "No, ma'am." "Did your mother know about it?" Another shake of the head. "No, I was scared." Her voice cracked on the last word. "God." I felt something break inside me hearing that. Not anger. Grief. Because while Ethan and I were fighting over legal strategy, our daughter had been carrying fear alone in her bedroom, trying to protect both parents at the same time. The judge looked toward Denise next. "When did you receive this recording?" 3 days ago, Your Honor," Denise answered calmly. Lily approached me privately after the previous hearing. I advised her not to discuss it with either parent until today. That was smart. Professional, clean, believable. The judge nodded once. Then she turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Bennett," she said carefully, "is there any context you believe materially changes what this court just heard?" For the first time since I'd known him, Ethan genuinely had no immediate answer. Not because he lacked intelligence. Because manipulation depends on preparation. And truth is dangerous precisely because it arrives unplanned. His attorney leaned toward him whispering urgently, but Ethan barely reacted. He looked stunned. Like a man realizing too late that control and loyalty are not the same thing. Finally, he cleared his throat. "The recording lacks context." Weak. Even he seemed to hear how weak it sounded. Denise didn't attack immediately. That's what good attorneys understand after someone exposes themselves. Silence often damages them more than confrontation. The judge studied Ethan for several seconds before speaking again. "This court is deeply concerned by what appears to be coordinated emotional manipulation involving a minor child." Patricia visibly flinched. The judge continued. "Particularly repeated language suggesting the mother was emotionally unsafe despite contradictory evidence." Safe. Unsafe. Those words had haunted this entire case. Now suddenly everyone could see how deliberately they'd been planted. Lily wiped tears from her face with trembling fingers. Then quietly, almost too softly to hear, she said, "I thought maybe if Daddy kept saying it long enough, people would stop loving Mommy." No one spoke after that. Because there was nothing left to say. A child had just explained the entire case in one sentence. The judge called a recess shortly afterward. The second we stepped into the hallway outside the courtroom, Lily ran toward me. Not carefully this time, not hesitantly. She crashed into my arms so hard I nearly lost balance. "I'm sorry," she sobbed against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry." I held her immediately. Tight. Protective. The way I should have months earlier instead of constantly trying to stay composed enough to survive court. "You have nothing to apologize for," I whispered. But I waited too long. "Number?" I pulled back just enough to look at her face. "No, baby. Listen to me carefully." My voice shook despite every effort to steady it. "Adults are supposed to protect children. You were trying to survive something confusing. That is not your fault." Her crying softened slightly, but she still looked devastated. "I thought Daddy would hate me." That sentence hurt more than anything Ethan had done to me personally. Because that was the real damage manipulation causes children. They begin believing love is conditional on silence. I brushed damp hair away from Lily's face carefully. "You told the truth," I said. "That takes courage most adults never find." Behind us, courthouse doors opened. I looked up and saw Ethan standing at the far end of the hallway beside his attorney. For a moment, neither of us moved. Months earlier, I probably would have searched his face for regret. Now I saw something else entirely. Loss of control. And strangely enough, that made him look smaller than I had imagined all these months. Not powerful, not dangerous. Just deeply weak. The emergency review moved faster than anyone expected after that hearing. The judge ordered additional investigation into witness coaching and emotional coercion involving Lily. Ethan's request for primary custody was immediately suspended. Temporary primary placement remained with me pending final review. And once legal scrutiny intensified, more truth started surfacing. Sophia admitted the relationship with Ethan had been ongoing for nearly a year. Patricia's text messages revealed repeated discussions about presenting stability and making the court understand Claire's emotional limitations. Not once had they directly fabricated violence or abuse. That was what made the manipulation sophisticated. They simply repeated suggestions long enough to reshape perception. That's how emotional narratives work in real life, not through dramatic lies, through repetition. By the time the final ruling arrived 6 weeks later, the courtroom atmosphere had changed completely. The judge's written findings specifically referenced subtle but sustained efforts to undermine the child's perception of her mother. Reading those words felt surreal. Because for months I had been trying to explain something I could feel happening but could not fully prove. Now finally someone else saw it too. I received primary custody. Ethan was granted limited supervised visitation pending family counseling and psychological evaluation. When the ruling ended, Patricia looked 20 years older than when this process began. Sophia left quickly without speaking to anyone. And Ethan? Ethan approached me once in the courthouse hallway afterward, while Lily sat with Denise near the elevators. "I never wanted this to happen," he said quietly. I looked at him for a very long moment. The old version of me might have argued, demanded answers, asked why. But exhaustion had burned those questions out of me months ago. Instead, I simply said, "You wanted control more than you wanted honesty." He didn't deny it. That was the closest thing to truth he ever gave me. Months later, Lily and I started therapy together. Not because we were broken. Because healing deserves structure too. At first, the sessions were difficult. Lily struggled with guilt. She worried constantly about hurting people by speaking honestly. Sometimes she still lowered her voice instinctively before expressing feelings like she was afraid honesty itself might start another war. But slowly things changed. She laughed more, slept better, stopped chewing her sleeves raw with anxiety. And me. I started learning something military life never really teaches you. Survival and healing are not the same thing. One warm July evening, nearly a year after the custody battle ended, Lily and I sat beside a lake watching fireworks burst across the sky during an Independence Day celebration. Reflections shimmered across the water in red and gold waves. Lily leaned her head against my shoulder. "Mom." "Yeah, baby. Do you think the truth always comes out eventually?" I thought about that carefully before answering. "No," I said honestly, "not always on its own." She looked up at me. I smiled softly and squeezed her hand. "Sometimes the truth needs someone brave enough to speak for it." Lily smiled after that. A real smile, light, free. And in that moment I realized something that mattered far more than revenge or courtroom victories. Ethan had spent months trying to convince our daughter that love required silence. Instead, she learned that real love tells the truth even when it's terrifying. And maybe that was the most important victory of all. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Have you ever seen someone quietly manipulate a family while pretending to protect it? Or watched truth finally surface through the courage of someone unexpected? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. We share powerful emotional stories like this every day, so subscribe and stay with us for the next journey. Because sometimes the smallest voice in the room carries the truth everyone else was too afraid to say.